Let's execute the country transaction. What do we see here? This is our transactions web form. Let's see what happens if we start inserting records in this country transaction. First of all, we need to enter the identifier, country ID. It would be great for this identifier to be auto-numbered, because then we would not have to remember the last value that was entered. Since country ID is an identifier, its purpose is to make sure that the record is unique, but it's not representing anything from our reality. We will document this fact in the country transaction before actually implementing the change to make it an auto-numbered attribute. Another thing we just thought about is that it would be convenient to have an attribute that would tell us the region of the world that this country belongs to. So we'll create this attribute, but first we're going to create some documentation about what we've just talked about. So we return to our KB in order to implement these changes. I open the country transaction and go to its documentation. And now we'll start editing it. I'll say that auto IDs should be auto-numbered. And that it would be convenient to define an attribute that would allow us to save the region of the world that this country belongs to. If we click Preview, we can see what our documentation will look like. We save the changes, and we leave the documentation and go to our transaction structure in order to define our attribute, country ID, as auto-numbered. How do we do this? Well, every GeneXus object has a set of properties that affect both its behavior and its appearance. How can we edit these properties? In this case, the properties of country ID. We'll place our pointer on top of this attribute, and then we right-click and select the option Properties. Or as we see here, we could just press F4, and the Properties tool panel would appear. So I press F4, and this panel appears, and it will always display the properties of the object that is currently selected. So in this case, we can see the properties of the country ID attribute. Specifically, we are looking through the set of properties in search of the auto number property, which by default is set to false. We'll set it to true, and we'll define it as starting from the value 1 and set the step to be 1, 2. Before we save our changes, let's think about this. The attribute country ID is based on the domain ID. So we could set this auto number property at the domain level, and all the attributes based on this domain would inherit this behavior. So let's undo this change and set auto number back to false. I save the changes, and we'll edit the properties for the domain ID. Here we find the same auto number property and set it to true, and now the ID domain is auto numbered. Returning to the country transaction, we see that country ID is based on the ID domain and will be auto-numbered. And what about city ID? It's based on the ID domain as well, which means that it will be auto-numbered as well. But city ID is not a simple primary key. It is a primary key along with country ID in this table, which corresponds to the second level. So this auto-number property should not be set for city ID. Let's edit the properties of city ID, and we'll set its value back to false, which modifies the domain's default behavior. We save the changes, and now we'll create the country world region attribute. We put our mouse pointer here and press enter and create the new attribute. We'll define it as numeric 1, and each value will correspond to one of the 5 continents. We save these changes, and looking at the web form, we can verify that there's a new attribute here. But when we run this transaction, we'll have to enter one of the values, 1, 2, 3, or 4, corresponding to the continent we wish to represent with this attribute. It would be much easier if we could just see the names of the continents. To do this, we'll have to modify the appearance of this attribute. So we'll go back to the structure, and we'll edit the properties once again. And this time, it'll be this attribute we're selecting right here. And to do this, we'll press F4. And we go to the property called Control Type, and instead of the option Edit, we will select the option Combo Box, and we'll define values, the values the combo box will display. The value 0 will be none, we'll add America, which will be the value 1. Africa will have the value 2. Europe, 3. Asia, 4. Oceania, 5. I click OK, and we save the changes. Returning to the web form, we can see that the appearance of this control has changed. I'd like to mention that since we define this combo box at the level of the structure of the transaction, this attribute will also appear as a combo box in all other forms in which this attribute is present. It would have been different if we had defined the combo box while in the web form and then edited the properties. If we had done that, the attribute would only have been displayed as a combo box on this particular web form. We have added a new attribute to the country transaction and modified the auto number property of the country ID attribute. If we press F5 again, a reorganization will take place because the change we made will cause physical changes within the database. So I press F5, the impact analysis report shows us that we have a new attribute in the country table. So let's continue reorganizing. And our developer menu is run again. If we open our country transaction, we'll see that the appearance of this attribute has changed, and it's displaying the